Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today on the bench we have a 2017 Chevy Silverado 5.3 liter with a 6L80 transmission. The customer is starting to have a shutter concern and we found metal in the pan. Let's tear it down and see what's going on. First thing that I always look at with these units, and the first thing that I do, is check the converter. You hear the noise that's scrubbing. The pump in this one here is probably pretty scored up and worn out. Let's get it apart. It looks like she may have been slightly overheated. Converter hub feels pretty good, but there is a little bit of wear here from on the pump gears. Take our converter lockup O-ring and remove it. Take the vent tube and pull it up and pry it out of the way. It's a lot easier to remove the pump assembly when you do this. The vent tube has to be transferred to a new converter housing that holds the pump when you replace these. Also, so we're probably going to be replacing the bell housing. There's a snap ring in here that holds the converter seal in the pump housing. Move that. Most of these that I get in has a seal here on the bell housing. This is a seal that goes on the thermostat bypass valve. Always replace it with a new one. I've seen quite a few guys that would call me and say, hey man, I got a leak after installing a new unit right here at this section where the bypass valve is, and they've forgotten that seal. But the overhaul kit comes with a new one. Boy, that fluid is jet black. Let's go ahead and take our pan off. Make sure the compressor doesn't come on. There is a lot of metal in this pan. Set the pan to the side and take our filter off. Our filter is completely clogged up. But what happens when the converter friction material wears out in these units, it sends metal directly into the pan clogs the filter up, destroys the pump, and sends metal through the entire system, and causes a no pulling condition. Next, we're going to remove our seal, our passage sleeve retainer on the TCM. On the passage sleeve, it's mostly like some of the BMWs, has 2 O-ring seals and 1 flat seal on this section. To remove those, I've got to grab, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 E-Torx Plus. Those are EP10 size sockets. We got to get those removed, as well as an 8mm on the spring for the rooster cone. After that, then we can remove the valve body. In each unit that I do, I replace the TCM internal mode switch, and on the back side we have our input-output speed sensors. Those will get replaced as well, along with our passage sleeves. Our input-output speed sensors have 2 8mm bolts, and on the side of the TCM, or the Tecum, it's a transmission electronically hydraulically controlled module. There are 2 longer 8mm bolts. The bolts that are in the valve body are 8mm, 10mm, and 7mm. On this section of the valve body, the 7mm are the shortest ones, and they're all the same length. Whenever you're working on any of the 6L80 or 6L90 transmissions, this one section of the valve body has A, B, C, and D on it with these little raised nubs. This is for the RPO code of the vehicle or the transmission. This RPO code is an MYC with that raised portion that is ground down. If it was a 6L90, it would be an MYD, and that would be ground down. The 6L50s and the 6L45s would have either the A or the B ground down. Just note that if you're ever having to replace the valve body, that you get the correct one and it does match the original one. There have been some instances where the valve body was ordered and it was the incorrect valve body in the correct package. The internal mode switch is retained by one 10mm bolt, And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 10mm bolts, and they are all the same length. We're going to switch to our 7mm. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bolts in this section. Hang on a second, let me get that. Now in this section of the TCM, you have what you would have in the 4L60s as your pillow switch or your pressure manifold switch. When these have hydraulic fluid applied to them, it tells the TCM that the shift was made. And you'll see in these sections we have a little bit of metal here, here, mostly here. In your overhaul kit comes a new gasket plate, but in this instance we're going to be ordering a new TCM, and the new TCM comes with one automatically. Turn it over. Look at all of our check balls. A lot of these that I'll have, some of them that come in with either a neutral out from a stop in a drive position. The number 1 check ball here likes to undersize itself, and the overhaul kit comes with a different style of check balls. These are acrylic check balls, and the reason why they wear down is because they're spinning a lot of times in the bore when hydraulic fluid pressure is applied from one side or the other, and it just sits there and spins and wears itself out. Also highlighted here in this section, this is the number 8 check ball. Earlier revisions in 2007, 2008, the separator plate was updated to this design and did not have the number 8 check ball. The number 8 check ball was added to slow down the release of the low and reverse clutch when accelerating from a stop. The low and reverse clutch is on when you're accelerating for about anywhere from 0 to 5 miles an hour just for a few seconds, and then it releases. The condition that they had was almost like an end bump whenever you were trying to accelerate. Before it even shifted into second gear, you'd have a kick in the rear end. And basically the low and reverse clutch was releasing so fast that when it released, the one-way sprag that is in this section, because that's where the low and reverse clutch is, it basically would kick. So then when the low and reverse released, it would take and snap. See all that metal that's in the valve body, we got to get this thing really cleaned up, all the valves taken out and inspected. Because there are two things that I do change. This is your 2-4 shift select valve and your 1-3 shift select valve. So this is your second control and your third control. And in this section here is the converter regulator valve. The converter regulator valve on 2011 models had an issue or a complaint where the customer would come in with a shutter vibration, but it only happens in V4 mode. So what happens is the spring here in this section would actually break. The Transgo shift select valve kit comes with both brand new shift select valves that are steel valves and they float very easily. And it comes with a new converter regulator valve and spring. We're going to take a look at something so I can show you if I can get the valve out. Our 2-4 shift select valve, there are some bulletins for this valve specifically setting a DTC or a tie-up or a bind-up when trying to accelerate from a stop. And at the end of the valve, it actually has a lightning mark. Now the lightning mark, in the bulletin states that if it does have this lightning mark, to replace this control valve body assembly. And it is located right here. In this one section, it does have a lightning mark. So even if you do replace this entire valve body, the new valve body assembly will have the same concern if you take the valve out. That's why I always replace them with the Transgo shift select valves. Another important item when doing vacuum testing on this valve body is to check the AFL valve. If the AFL valve is worn out, then Sonex does make a drop in their zip kit with a sleeved valve and spring. I don't normally have to replace all of them, but I do have some of those valves in stock in case we need to. Another condition that I've seen, is usually with like low mileage vehicles, is the CBR1 456 clutch select valve. I've seen it actually get stuck in the bore, and you normally have to ream that out with an oversized valve, but that will all get checked. Get some of this cleaned up and we'll take the unit apart. I love that snap-on impact gun. Its breakaway torque is almost immediate. Take our 15mm bolts out of the bell housing and separate our pump. Our pump O-ring seal between the case and the pump bell housing. Like our dampener shaft is intact, nothing's overheated. This is for our overdrive clutch or our 456 clutch. This is a dampener shaft to reduce the shock when it goes into 4th, 5th, and 6th gear. Take all of our 8mm bolts out of the pump body. Down into, she's lightly scored. Probably get that machine, just take a couple thousandths off of this one. All right, and this one section is our boost valve and pressure regulator valve setup. You take the boost valve, press it in, and it has a little pin that falls out. Then we take and remove. I can already tell that pressure regulator valve there is completely worn out. Well, we will get a new boost valve and pressure regulator valve. I've got most of the parts already in stock, but there are a few things I still got to order. We have our bump spring for our boost valve and our pressure regulator valve spring. Yeah, you can tell on the lands here starting to see some wear, and that one is completely worn out on one entire side. The Sonex valve, this bore here extends all the way out, and our lands are reduced for converter charge. That allows the Sonex valve to not wear because it has more support throughout the valve bore. Take away our pump rotor and vane and check the pump pocket. And do have some scoring in the pump pocket. So we're going to have to get a new converter housing for that. So in this section, we're going to take and disassemble our stator support. There is a gasket and O-ring seal that needs to be replaced when we take and have our pump body remachined and get a new converter housing. 99% of the time, you're going to be replacing this bell housing. And if you do not have a machine shop that can do any kind of resurfacing, that will have to be replaced entirely. Our new pump kit comes with The slide does not come with a pivot pin, so we're going to have to order a new pivot pin and spring assembly. Sonex makes new ones that come with a spring on it. I don't feel any excessive wear on the pin, but I can see it. We're going to still have to get a new one. Our new seals and sealing rings will come in the overhaul kit. Take and set that to the side. These are our front planetary gears. Make sure you check the gears for any kind of damage, any kind of wear. We'll definitely get these cleaned up. I do not ever see anything naturally wrong with the front planetaries. These are pretty good. And check the sun gear to make sure there's no pitting in the gears. And always replace your bearings. You don't want to have to take it apart twice. And we have our plastic thrust washer underneath the front planet. All right, let's look at our 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3/5R drum. I'm going to remove the 3/5R clutch pack first, starting with the snap ring, our backing plate, our frictions and steels, as our 3/5R clutch is pretty hot. The customer probably had it in reverse, trying to either get out of position, and it started to slip and just probably held it to the floor to try to get it in any kind of motion to move the vehicle. And we have our cushion spring. It's in good condition. And we have our clutch pack apply ring fingers. Next, we're going to go after our 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch. This is applied in first, second, third, and fourth. This clutch comes on when you place the vehicle into drive. I'm already starting to see some heating on the steels and the frictions. But we've got all new ones coming in. Of our backing plate that has these indentations faced up when you're installing this backing plate into the drum. And our cushion spring. Some notable areas of concern with this drum that I always replace this drum and the 1, 2, 3, 4 apply piston. Sonex makes a billet piston because on the inside where the piston actually applies, it has pressure that's applied to one side of this piston, and as it does over time, it starts to get cracks and hairline fractures, as well as this area in the drum. The GFX drum that I install in all of my 6L80 builds has a better laser weld, and it holds up, and it's a lot stronger than the stock drum. Next, we're going to move on to our turbine shaft with 4, 5, 6 clutch hub. Always replace your sealing rings. You have 3 of them here. One hole is for rear lube to the rear planetary set, and this one is for the 456 clutch piston apply. Normally I can tell whether the transmission stopped and failed either at highway speeds or at low speeds. If this clutch pack is completely burnt up, he was probably moving at highway speeds when the transmission failed. Now through this clutch pack assembly, you can tell that there is a lot of metal and a little bit of heat that's already started to get into this clutch. That's the number one reason why anytime you have converter failure, don't just replace the converter, the pump, flush the system and put it back together. Even when I've done these under warranty, it's full overhaul when the converter fails. Another notable section is with the apply piston in the 456 clutch is the location of the apply piston on the outside. So if I take the cushion spring for the 456, you'll notice on the outer edge of that cushion spring is where it applies. On every rebuild, I install a high capacity 456 clutch piston assembly, or just an oversized one that Sonex makes, to where the actual apply is pushed a little bit more towards the inner side, and the first plate on the bottom side gives it more apply surface area towards the inside. That allows this clutch to hold up and does not cone. All right, the next piece we're going to take out is our 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch hub with shaft assembly and our bearing. I always replace every one of these bearings on every transmission that I built. Reason being, any metal gets into it, you can't tell if it's going to have a problem even if you clean it. The best thing to do is always replace your bearings. This clutch hub's not overheated. I don't see any damage to where the clutch pack applies or any scoring going on with the shaft. The next clutch hub that we're going to look at is our 2.6 and 3.5R clutch hub. On the bottom section of the clutch hub, yeah, that is correct. Our 3.5R clutch applies here on the outside, and our 2.6 applies on the lower side. Our shaft looks pretty good. Where the bushings have been riding, I don't have any scores, we can get that cleaned up. And the bushings on the inside here and there, I'm always replacing. Then our bearing. Next, we're going to remove the center support. The center support holds the 2.6 clutch on the top side and the low in reverse and the low sprag on the bottom side. On the inside of the transmission, there is a large snap ring that is always placed at the 9 o'clock position whenever you reinstall it. This holds the center support from walking in the case. There is a section here and here that we take and put our snap ring pliers. These are the large ones. This is Blue Point PR54 that I use because it is a locking snap ring style. It makes it a lot easier to remove this snap ring. Some people use the Adaptacase yellow snap ring pliers, but this one locks it entirely in place and I'm able to release it. Sometimes the center support gets a little wedged in here. And here are all the parts that I have laid out for this transmission. Good bit of metal in this one. It's getting stuck in between the center support and the case. There we go. Let's see if we can get it to come straight out. Normally I really don't have this issue, but she's got a good bit of debris in here. Well, I tell you what, this one's going to be a tough one. Let's see if we can just make this a little bit easier. So we have our output carrier ring gear and our output shaft. We have our output planetary gear set. Our bearing on top of the sun gear. All right, the case is completely empty. Let's take a look at our 2/6 clutch and their bushings. This one here I see a lot of problems with. The bushing walking out of the center support, and sometimes I have to replace the entire center support for that condition, because the new bushing, when I drive this bushing out and try to drive the new one in, it just slides straight in and falls out. Our 2/6 clutch frictions and steels, they look pretty good. New bonded piston. And then our low and reverse clutch. The frictions and steels look pretty good. And our wave spring and our backing plate. In this section we have our low sprag. There is no sprag assembly on the inside. It is a dual caged that you can replace. If you have to replace this for any kind of reason, you have to get the entire sprag assembly. To remove that, you have to press down here on this section Do not compress it here on the outer side. It will damage and break the sprag, and then you got to get a new one. So you take and press down here on this section with a hydraulic press to remove the snap ring. And below this is an O-ring seal and our low and reverse piston. Go over everything that I'm either ordering that I do not have, which is going to be the converter and the Sonex 1234 billet piston that goes in this drum. This drum is the GFX drum. The weld on it is 10 times better than the stock unit and holds up a lot better. We have our cooler bypass valve from Shift Technologies Superior Solutions. This will be installed on every 6L80 unit that has a thermostat bypass valve. We have our Sonex pressure regulator valve. We have our new bearings, our new Durabond bushings, our Transgo shift select valves and converter regulator valve, our pump rotor assembly, all new bonded pistons and balance pistons, our frictions, our overhaul kit, filter, and our steels. We'll get everything cleaned up and get ready for an assembly video coming up soon. So y'all make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification. See you next time.